Wow, what a warm welcome. Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. It's my distinct honor and privilege to be able to speak to you here. I don't think I can change that. I think some people were saying it's a little blinding. Is that, we just turn it off. Let's just make that happen. You're welcome. And if you start talking while I'm talking, I'm going to turn it back on. So again, thank you so much for having me. What an honor. It's always a privilege to speak to a room full of women. My entire practice for the last 22 years, I've been working on inspiring women to reach their highest potential in all kinds of ways. And so today, I thought it would be great to be able to share a few of my own secrets to success. And as you heard, my husband owns Cornwall Bakery in the park, and I have my own recipe for you today, but it doesn't involve baking. So after 22 years of being a therapist and seeing thousands of patients, inpatient, outpatient, at workshops and retreats, and speaking engagements just like today, I've developed a recipe. But again, it has nothing to do with cooking today. It's a recipe for living our best lives. It's for reaching our highest potential. And in my opinion, it also has everything to do with wringing more joy out of the moments in between. Because when you think about it, our lives are made up of all of these little tiny moments. The big stuff is only few and far between. The big events, the big ones, like having a child or getting married or graduation ceremonies or big important events, those are only little tiny pieces of our lives. And I think if we can work to try to maximize the joy in the ordinary moments in between, we're really learning how to wring more joy out of our lives. So many women that I work with and so many women that I know really shy away from reaching their full potential because, in my opinion, they're unwilling to be uncomfortable. They're uncertain about where they're going next, or they're uncertain about the outcome that might be possible. So today I'm going to pose a few questions to you. Are you willing to sit in some sense of uncertainty or discomfort? Are you willing to show up even when the outcome isn't clear and remain unattached to that outcome? Are you willing to put your work out there, your voice, your contributions, your talents, and your gifts and your skills, and work in a very important and unique way? Are you willing? In order to be willing, in my opinion, we also have to have a sense of readiness. That's the other part of this recipe. And readiness, in my opinion, comes from maintaining impeccable attention to self-care. It also has everything to do with preparation, staying prepared, and stepping into courage and bravery. Because where would we be without harnessing the power of courage? So how do we reach our full potential? My recipe includes these 3 ingredients. Willingness to be uncomfortable, and that includes vulnerability, which is something we work very hard to protect. It also includes preparation and readiness, which has a lot to do, in my opinion, with impeccable attention to self-care and mindfulness practices, which I'm going to be talking a lot about today. And the third most important ingredient is courage. And you may not think that that's really that important, but when we think about the times in our lives when we want to make deep connection with people, we have to have a sense of willingness to be uncomfortable. We have to be ready to harness vulnerability, and we have to be willing to show up with courage and bravery. A couple years ago, I decided to name a word of the year. So instead of making a New Year's resolution, I decided to harness the power of bravery. This was 2 years ago. And in order to be really accountable to that, I kept a log on my computer called the Brave Log. And I started getting really brave with things that I was doing in my life. And I thought it was really only going to be a tracker for my professional achievements. And so I was writing things in there like pitching to this organization to be a speaker, or trying to write this article for this publication. And I would track it and kind of go back and see rejected, rejected, rejected. And sometimes that happens. But the Brave Log kept me going. And then I started to realize, you know what? You can be brave in lots of ways. And my daughter, this was in the summer, she used to say, Mom, you want to go swimming? And we'd go to the pool, and that meant she would swim and I would stay out of the pool and watch her swim. And I thought, why am I doing that? And I'd see the kids drop their towel and walk right over to the diving board. I was totally aghast. You know, they're not even feeling the temperature of the water. And they walk over to the diving board and walk right down the end of the plank and jump in, you know, like a pirate off the ship, you know, and nothing to it. So they got out and they're waving at me and I'm taking pictures, and I got up and I dropped my towel and I walked right over to the diving board and I pushed that little 4-year-old out of the way. And then I walked up to that diving board and I walked right to the end, and my children's faces were like, oh, where is our mother and who are you? And I jumped right off without feeling the water, and I put it in my Brave log. And so some of these things are just ways of keeping ourselves accountable, and as I started to do that, I expanded into joy. I moved into being really present and mindful in a new way, and I was able to harness those moments in between. So many women, I believe, stop working towards achieving their personal and professional goals because of a few reasons. And one of them is they get stopped in their own ego, and they get stopped in fear. I was afraid. Afraid of what? Cold water? The shock of a summer refreshing plunge in a pool? It was fantastic. I highly recommend it. But these are voices that shut us down. Sometimes we have these in our heads, and I hear them a lot in my practice, and I've heard them in my own mind. This is a dumb idea, you hear yourself say. Oh, it's been done before. Somebody's going to do it better than I am. No one's going to benefit from this. How many of you can relate to having those kinds of thoughts and feelings rolling around sometimes in that inner critic? No one? Okay, a few hands. All right. The rest of you are liars. I hear things like, it's just too much work. I can't do it. It's just too much work. Or that's just too big of a goal. I can't handle that. Well, some of the best things that we achieve take years of contributions. So we have to keep that in mind too. I hear people say things like, this is going to take forever. And I want to encourage you to really pause when you have that inner critic roll up inside your mind and think about turning down the volume. Because your gifts are unique to you, and your offerings are not the same as anyone else. And your voice will resonate with a very specific group of people in this world. There's enough room for your ideas and your contributions, and no one gets to tell your story. Only you can do that. I thought about this as we looked at the funeral tape for Aretha Franklin. She was miraculous, wasn't she? She didn't let that little voice shut her down. You know, as I was watching the tapes of her performances over the years, as they were kind of reviewing the history of her life, I thought to myself, she showed up. She showed up. So it was just really another moment of inspiration for me, that she didn't shut herself down. She never decided to stay small. And you know, we're going to get out there, and we're going to have these critical, critics in the corner. And you know what Brene Brown says about that, the amazing author Brene Brown? She says, if you're going to put yourself in the middle of the arena, you're going to be judged. You will be criticized. But guess what? I don't care what you have to say if you're up there in the cheap seats, because you're not down in the arena. You decided not to show up. So I really don't have any interest in your feedback. So that's a really great way that kind of keeps me going. I love that. It's a bit bossy. We can be a little bossy. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's a lot of pressure these days for women to do it all. We have to have it all together. We have to look great. We have to be successful in our careers. We should be the perfect mother, the perfect spouse, employee, volunteer, friend and neighbor. And we have to be able to host large-scale dinner parties effortlessly with a smile. We should cook and clean and keep up with everything in between. And we gotta look thin while we're doing it. And we should look young and never tired and never stressed. Who are we kidding? But if you pay attention to the headlines in the magazines, that's exactly what the messages are. And I think there's no doubt that there's a correlation right now between an uprising, no matter what your political beliefs are, with women having a voice today more than ever. And it's important that we stay in tune with that. So I'm going to tell you a little true story about what happened to me when I was trying to do it all, and then I'll keep with my rhyming, I actually hit the wall. I'm going to call it the unforgettable load of laundry and how mindfulness changed my life. So in 2002, I had a 1-year-old child who's now 17 and amazing and driving me around. I'm waiting for a ride from him sometimes. I'm like, where are you? Come get me. And I was working at Bon Secours Hospital with Judy, that's now Beaumont, Grosse Pointe. And I was in graduate school at the University of Michigan, driving 45 minutes in one direction from Royal Oak, and then I was driving 45 minutes in the other direction for work. And I decided at that particular time, while I was raising a 1-year-old, going to grad school, and working, it would be a perfect time to apply to speak at a conference in Finland. I would not recommend that, and hindsight is 20/20. I was trying hard to do everything for everyone, and I always felt like I was coming up short. When I was at work, I was thinking about my baby. When I was with my baby, I was thinking about my job. When I was at my job, I was thinking about graduate school. And I was never fully present, and I was constantly stressed and multitasking, and consequently miserable. That summer, I was taking an accelerated graduate level course, so they not only are rigorous in their program at U of M, but they decided to cram it in to like half the time, and the subject was light and fluffy. It was death and dying, so something easy. And I was preparing to speak at an international conference in Finland with a 1-year-old with me. I did take my husband and my son on that trip. And I remember thinking of all the things I had to do to get ready, and my heart started to pound in my chest. And I was walking into the garage, the parking garage at the University of Michigan, to get into my car and make the long drive back in rush hour to Royal Oak. And my legs felt like Jell-O. And my face got hot. And I barely made it to my car. And when I opened the car door, I collapsed in the driver's seat and exploded into a sobbing fit of tears. The next day, I landed on the soft couch of a wonderful therapist. And I made a call and said, I can't do this anymore. I think I've literally hit the wall. I remember describing it to her. I said, I think I hit the wall, and now I'm just sliding down, and I need some support. And she taught me in that moment about living in the moment. She taught me about mindfulness. And this was back in 2002, before the big movement of mindfulness really kicked off. So she was really ahead of her time. That night, I went home and I thought, I have to practice this. She said to me, go home and start to do this right away. I want you to be fully present and engaged and in front of what you're in front of all the time. Because when you're over here, you're thinking of that, and when you're over here, you're thinking of that, and then you're never fully present with anything that you're practicing or doing, and it's too much for you. So I went home and I thought, okay, I got this. And then I thought, oh my God, I gotta make dinner. My baby needs a bath. Now I gotta write a paper tonight, and I gotta get back to those emails, and I gotta pack for Finland, and I had all this stuff going around in my mind. And then I thought, no, you know what, Megan? Just go flip the laundry. Just do one thing at a time. And so I put everything on the back burner, and I went down into the basement, and I opened up the dryer, and the sheets were still hot. Do you know there's like a beautiful little glowing light in that miraculous machine? I had never really noticed that before, but it was warm and golden, and it looked like I could hear like little angels singing when I opened up that door. And I open up that door, and I hear angels singing, and I see the light. I mean, it was an amazing experience. And I remember this load of laundry. I pulled the laundry out, and she said, you have to also use your senses in order to pull yourself into the moment. I thought, I'll use my senses right now. I'm gonna pull this laundry out and smell it. And I smelled the laundry detergent, and I put my husband's white t-shirts all over my arms, and I felt the heat of that load of laundry. And in that moment, it seared into my mind a profound sense of gratitude. Doesn't that sound weird? Laundry made me feel grateful for being alive. It was truly miraculous. And so mindfulness practices really lead us to live a wholehearted life. They help us, in turn, reach our highest potential. But being mindful does not mean that you eliminate suffering. So many people who are studying mindfulness these days, and the founders of this movement, help us understand that mindfulness actually helps us just have a heightened sense of awareness. It brings us into the here and now in a way that is very beneficial in lots of ways therapeutically, but also enriches our quality of life. So you become conscious of your feelings and you don't immediately rush to escape them, which is a skill. We're getting really good at numbing. Do you know that we're the most highly addictive, overweight, consumption-driven, stressed-out country in the world? Because we're so eager to escape our discomfort. That's why. And we're so used to having everything handed to us so quickly that if you wait 2 minutes for a sandwich, you're ready to walk out. I mean, if your internet isn't this fast, you're like, something's wrong with the connection, you know? I mean, people are complaining right away about things that are not at hyper-accelerated speeds. So what we have to do is remember why mindfulness brings us into this state and how we need to make these changes. And so it's important for us to know that mindfulness is becoming a movement right now. And why is that happening? I think it's because it's an antidote to feeling disconnected. Again, Brené Brown says we are hardwired for connection. We are hardwired for connection. And we're living in a world of artificial social media disconnection. And I think over time, that doesn't feel very good. So that's why I love the foundation of this group. How long has this group been meeting? Many years now. Since 50 years, really? What an incredible movement that you've created to make real connection with each other, to make real, moments of mindful joy with each other. And we are hardwired for that kind of connection. So being mindful, again, just getting back to the idea of this, can help us feel more awake, more alive, and more engaged. And how do we practice mindfulness? We use our senses. Think of the laundry. In that moment, I was like almost moved to tears, maybe from the exhaustion, maybe from the stress, but hopefully from the moment of just, wow, I'm here, I'm awake, I'm alive, and I'm really thinking about what's in front of me. I transferred that idea from 2002 all the way through to yesterday. I mean, even just sitting outside on my patio, I just, love looking at things that are happening in my yard, birds and beetles and all kinds of things that I'm seeing. It was interesting too, I'll just make a point of this, sharing. We are so preoccupied with being busy and thinking of the next thing. The other day I was going to pick up my son at South, and I usually just do quick checks on my phone while I'm waiting for him to get to the car, which everyone is doing, by the way. Everyone's scrolling through and checking things and I was rescheduling some patients. And then I thought, God, you have 5 minutes. Can't you put that thing down for 5 minutes and just look out the window? And when I looked out my car window, I caught the tail of something large circling my car. And I looked up, there were 2 bald eagles circling over my car. What a profound moment that I would have missed checking Twitter. Right? So then I tweeted about it, and that all worked out great. So how do we access mindfulness? We stay in the moment, right? We stay awake, we use our senses, we try to come back to single tasking instead of multitasking. We think about how many times a day are you doing 3 things at once? Women are very good at this. Men are not as good at this. We won't complain about that. But it is really something to acknowledge. I know myself, I'm like eating a boiled egg over the sink in the morning, kicking the dishwasher, clothes, feeding the dogs, and hit and go on the day. So that doesn't feel very mindful. I try to be present when I'm eating. I try to be present when I'm listening to people. That's one of the richest joys of being a psychotherapist, is having a full session to really be in the moment, listening and being present, because everyone deserves that. So you can bring that skill into what you're doing in your lives too. So what goes hand in hand with mindfulness, in my opinion? It's self-care. If you're not taking great care of yourself, you need to start that practice today and protect it fiercely, because no one will do that for you. And this is kind of broader than just eating right and exercising. Of course, those are important things, but we're talking about self-care in terms of really knowing who you are and knowing more about how to protect your own boundaries, knowing how to be grateful and practice those kinds of things. But when I think about self-care, I think of these pillars, right? And if one of them starts to fall, like the whole foundation starts to fall. So I teach this a lot in my practice, because oftentimes I found that people would come to me and they have a crisis or a trauma or something that they're trying to work out, and I hear what that presenting problem is, and then I backtrack to, well, tell me a little bit about current stuff. How is everything going with, how are you sleeping? You know, is the stress of this impairing your ability to sleep? How's your diet? How are you eating? How are you doing with moving your body or exercising? What kinds of things do you like to do within outlets for stress and socialization, recreation, leisure, and fun? And I think that when we start to look at these pieces, we realize that when we're taking impeccable care of ourselves, everything else starts to feel easier, right? Think about back to when you had a baby. You're ready to cry at Kroger because you didn't get any sleep for 3 months, you know? I mean, right? It's really hard to cope when we're not sleeping well, when we're not eating well, we're not taking good care of ourselves. Everything else starts to crumble. So self-care is a really important piece of this. I always think about this on an airplane when you get on and they're doing the safety instructions and they say, put your airbag on if it should fall, and first assist yourself and then your neighbor. That I just want to like stand up and give a little cheer every time. They always tell me to sit down and put my seatbelt back on. But I feel excited about that because it reminds me that self-care is something that we need to pay attention to, because what good are we when we're not able to take great care of ourselves? The problem is when we bend on that, we're not only compromising things for us, but then we end up resenting the people we love and we're trying to care for, right? That's not so good. It doesn't feel so good. So sleep and hydration, nutrition, exercise, outlets for stress. If you're trying to live your most highly actualized, highest potential, how can you do it if you don't have these things in place? So that is sort of the foundation of the work that I've done for the last couple decades, and I find it to be very effective in helping people kind of rise up or level up if they're looking to do that. In addition to those basics of self-care are other factors too. Like I mentioned, gratitude practices. The amazing author Shawn Achor is a positive psychologist. I got to hear him speak about a year ago at the Pennsylvania Conference for Women, and he was remarkable. If you don't know his work, he's got some very positive books about happiness research and really interesting pieces of literature. But he said at this conference that gratitude practices actually help our brains scan for positive things, right? So when we start to feel like we're in a bad mood, or we're getting a little gloomy, or we're getting critical or complaining, we can move that pretty easily by coming into a state of gratitude. And I find it fascinating to think about where this comes from. It's because we are hardwired for negative bias thinking. So I'll tell you a tiny little research story on this. Lucy is the cave woman that apparently they found her bones for. This anthropologist studies, you might have heard, I see some nodding heads. So this is a fascinating study. They found Lucy, I can't remember where, somewhere out, not in the States. And they tracked her bones all the way back and said, she's our oldest living human. And they said, why is it that Lucy survived and her peers did not? You know the answer? It's negative bias thinking. Because every time Lucy was standing in a field and she looked out in the savannah and saw a rock, she said, "Lion," and she lived. But all the other people who didn't have wiring for negative bias thinking looked out into the savannah and saw a rock and said, "It's probably just a rock," and it was a lion. And so that wiring for hypervigilance, that wiring for anxious thinking and worried thoughts is actually part of our DNA makeup. So it's kind of interesting when you think about that because it trickles down to where we are today. So we need to work hard to pull that over to the positive and pull that over to a sense of gratitude. I also tell people it's really important that you know yourself, and you know yourself unapologetically. We really want to make sure that you're not apologizing if you're an introvert, or you're not apologizing if you're an early bird. Those are two things that I am. And I feel bad because I blame it on my husband because he's a baker, and I'm like, we got to leave this party early because this guy has got to go home. But it's me. I want to go home. I like to go to bed early. I naturally wake up at 5 o'clock and I feel like I got tons of energy. I'm writing blogs before 6 a.m. So, but that's my wiring, and I don't want to apologize for that. So if we know ourselves really well and we're unapologetic about it, it will help us in many ways claim what's right for us. And then we're, again, not resenting people that we're bending that for, right? So that's a really important piece. So another piece that we want to remember here is comparison. This is a really wonderful town, right? We've got all these gorgeous places to live here, but this is also a town of high comparison potential. And people will look over the fence and think, uh-oh, what are they doing? Or what does she look like? Or what is happening over here? And what kind of car are they driving? And that is the thief of joy, right? So we have to make sure that we're not in that, because when we compare ourselves to other people, we lose touch with who we are. And that promotes disconnection. So this constant drive to try to be perfect, the wheel that I was turning in 2002, was making me feel not only miserable, but disconnected. So I teach this in my practice, and I try to practice it in my life too. And I also have the distinct honor of marinating this concept when I take people on amazing retreats to Costa Rica and other places. We also just took a group of people on a food and wine tour to Tuscany last August, which was fantastic. But we do love, I hear a little buzz about that. Yeah, it was a really fun experience. But the Costa Rica retreats, we really dive into this immersion of mind, body, soul work, and it's like a power of 6 months of self-care and mindfulness in 1 week. Can you imagine waking up with the sound of monkeys and the sound of the ocean, the sounds of the jungle, and then sipping out of a coconut? It's really true. It really makes you feel alive and awake. We find headspace there, we find clarity in our thinking, and we're able to clear out all the blocks and resistance that might be keeping us back from seeking our highest evolved, most highest potential in our lives. So we get to break that down and really work towards living our best life. So in summary, why are we shying away from our highest potential? I believe it's because we're afraid. We're afraid to show up. But not showing up is harder, trust me. Are you willing to be uncomfortable from time to time? Are you willing to be vulnerable? Do you have the right toolkit to help yourself when you feel that vulnerability rise? Are you prepared and ready? Can you stay mindfully present and not immediately rush to escape it? And can you dig deep for courage when you need it and really step into that arena without apology? Then I believe you now have the recipe for reaching your highest potential. Thank you so much.